Hi everyone, this is Dan and this is X-Men Longshot. It's a trade paperback collecting Longshot number 1 through number 6 by Ann Nocenti and Art Adams. And I should stop starting these videos with laughing, but this video is really all about a point that I think should be made, because I think a lot of times in my videos I kind of continually praise certain things. Like, I'm usually praising European comics, I'm usually praising manga, and I'm usually praising 1980s comics, right? And I think it's important to note that there are in fact exceptions to the rule, and a lot of times some things are just my viewpoint, right? But Longshot is an example of an 80s comic that I really do not like. And don't get me wrong, this is a monumental mini-series, very important, especially in the realm of the X-Men, especially the 80s X-Men, especially I should say late 80s X-Men. So the second half of the 80s, with basically the sort of new team of the X-Men and all the stuff that happens in Australia, the Outback and whatnot. It's really important. This book is very monumental because it introduces the character Longshot, it introduces the character Mojo, and it introduces the character Spiral. All three of which created by Art Adams and Ann Nocenti. Now, that being said, I've had this trade paperback for a while, and it has been an absolute bear for me to get through. And I'm only going to go over issue 1 because I think issue 1 is enough to kind of give you the taste of it. And if people are, insistent on it, I will go and probably do a whole series going issue by issue through Longshot. Personally, I kind of don't want to because it's not like Nocenti's Daredevil, where I feel in Daredevil, Ann Nocenti's a lot more rodeoed in, I guess you could say. The editors keep more of a watchful eye on the shit she does on Daredevil, and I don't think she gets away with as much in that series. And I think also she becomes more refined in the Daredevil run. Longshot is one of her early works, and honestly, just the quick summary here is I think Marvel did a very good job of giving these characters, Longshot, Mojo, and Spiral, over to Chris Claremont. Because I think Anne looking over her characters as an editor is significantly better than Anne actually writing her characters. But that's just my opinion on that. Anyway, we'll jump into this. This is in the 80s, and there's a bunch of bloviating by Anne in the beginning of this. But anyway, so the opening is your typical American comic opening. You got a big splash page, and then a character using thought balloons and stuff. Seems pleasant enough, right? This seems like, oh, this would be something I like, right? Again, this is The Man Without Past, Longshot number 1, written by Ann Nocenti, pencils by Art Adams, inks by Anderson and Wilsh Bertasio. So early Wilsh Bertasio work right here. Letters by Joe Rosen, colors by Christy Scheel, edited by Louise Jones before she changed her name over to Louise Simonson before she got married. My guess is this it. And editor-in-chief Jim Shooter. So so looks like it's promising. Looks like this is action-packed. Colors are a little wacky. It's Art Adams' art. He's excellent. I love Art Adams. And then you'd think, like, yeah, this looks like this would be a great deal right here. It looks like we're in the action. He's kind of questioning, why are these people chasing after him, et cetera, et cetera. They look kind of like aliens. And then we proceed to kind of lose what happens. So the setting right here in the initial pages, or panels, I should say, is not explained. The character's not very well explained. We just kind of see him fly through a portal, and these aliens chase after him, and he somehow ends up in upstate New York. So right away, at least we now know we're in New York. And what kind of jars me about this issue is the art's fantastic. Obviously, it's Art Adams. What am I going to say? It's good stuff. there's a lot of like references that I kind of get a little bit like, ugh. Like this is like, you know, one of the cool things about Longshot is it's kind of like 90s comics before 90s comics. A lot of the stuff in Longshot reminds me of things that would be very prevalent and popular later in the 90s. There's a lot of references and stuff. So, for example, like Nocenti's Deli, you know, all the pouches and stuff, you know, overall, like really great detail, you know, figures and characters and that kind of stuff. But the dialogue that Ann uses in this book is really, really wonky. And that was like the most off-putting thing about it. So in a way, this is a comic book written for smart people or people smarter than their own good. And I guess in some ways that I could see why people would like Longshot. For me personally, it was just frustrating and a slog to get through. And honestly, all I wanted to do was like, I just need to read Longshot and say that I read Longshot, and then just get to the infinitely better Chris Claremont stories with him. just get to him and Dazzler. Just get to him and the X-Men dealing with Mojo. You know, the whole concept of Mojo, which is just better executed in the X-Men main story anyway. Or Spiral in general, which is a better character in the main X-Men story, especially with the body shop and all that stuff. But anyway, so he ends up just basically plopping into New York and becoming a hero by accident. And essentially what the comic is establishing, especially issue number 1, is Longshot's power, which is essentially luck, the ability to manipulate chance, probability, and luck. And you know, Ann Nocenti says as much in her her writings about her time writing this miniseries. Was the character originally is more metaphysical in his origin than something that she came up with as like a vision, right? And so in that way, that is probably why I've never been too big on Ann Nocenti. She can be very big-brained and almost like annoying and frustratingly annoying to try to get through some of her books. Sometimes she can have some very interesting points, and I think in Daredevil she's at her best, in my opinion. Outside of Daredevil, not so much. Not a big fan of her stuff here in Longshot. Not a big fan of when she herself is writing stuff for X-Men or New Mutants or stuff like that. But yeah, anyway, let me just get into this. So he ends up, you know, basically seeing this light and stuff. And he runs into this really weird dude named Elliot. And Elliot's basically a caricature. He's basically a crazy survivalist, you know, wingnut, for lack of a better term. And Ann Nocenti had a lot of characters like this. People who don't know, Ann Nocenti is very, very left-wing, very, very liberal. And like many other liberal writers, she would love to poke fun at, you know, people of the other opinion all the time, and she would caricature them all the time. Not very well, unfortunately, in a lot of her books, which makes some of her books very annoying to get through. But yeah, he kind of like was talking to this dude, then he ends up, and you get this really weird shopping scene where Longshot doesn't realize this mannequin isn't a real person, and this other chick that's in the shop kind of wants to get with him, but then she ends up figuring out he's nuts. Then he ends up in this forest and runs into this weird little animal that can talk. There's not actually an explanation of why this animal can talk, but since there's not really an explanation for Longshot, who, by the way, he hasn't even gone by Longshot, you're not really even introduced to this character's name till really the end. I don't really know what's going on either. Then he runs into Elliot again, and Elliot takes him into his underground bunker. And then they're kind of watching the news with all of his guns and his packaged food and stuff. Somehow he has some chick in the basement. Like, this isn't sketch at all. And apparently her kids got kidnapped by some weird monsters. And so he goes out to chase after these monsters. And then you got like a scene of these cops getting caught in a trap, which I actually had no idea what Ann Nocenti was doing with this, or why the cops are even out here. And then it all turns into this... Here's another thing I wanted to note, is that in this modern reproduction here, the colors here... And I don't have the original comic books by Marvel, So I don't know how they look on newsprint, but in reproduction, the colors are really, really bright, and they really do not contrast well. Like, this is kind of more of the older 80s style mood lighting, right? Like, characters are obviously colored in one color versus, you know, like a 3-color set here and there. And normally I actually am a big fan of this coloring method just because it's very efficient. But in this particular miniseries, especially issue number 1, it is like painful on the eyes. It is not bueno. Like, I'm not talking about 499 bad, but still, like, oof, like this kind of sucked. So again, while he's fighting to go save this woman's baby at the top of this windmill, you kind of get these references by these alien monsters that he's fighting, that, you know, he's somehow responsible for some, you know, bad deed done to these guys. What it is, I don't know. You know, at least looking at this issue right here as issue number 1, right? And that's kind of the thing you have to realize, is that if you approach this issue by itself, like, I'm actually surprised that Marvel kept selling issues of this. I don't know what the sales figures were for Longshot when it first came out in the 80s. I imagine well, because Marvel just was pretty much anything with Marvel back in the 80s was going to sell off the stands. And maybe Ann Nocenti and Art Adams and Jim Shooter were kind of counting on this because they were being, you know, very experimental with this book here. But yeah, eventually he's, you know, he gets repulsed from the tower, and then he comes up with this plan to lasso a rope over, walk over and kind of fight these guys, throws like some knives at them, which kind of dissipates them for a little bit, and is able to save the baby, return it to the woman, and then run off and take the name of Longshot and team up with this animal that kind of talks and stuff. I have no idea who this animal is, and by the way, at least looking at this issue by itself, right? So, again, I don't really want to go over the rest of this book because it's just, again, like, going through it, I have to go through all these little details and all this little, you know, bullshit dialogue lines by Ann Nocenti, and it's just not fun. I would much rather, if I was going to go over an Ann Nocenti comic book, I'd rather go over Daredevil, or I should say her good Daredevils. But the point that I wanted to make here is that not everything was great in the 80s, and Longshot, at least in my opinion, kind of freaking sucks. And, you know, it just, you know, for collectors, especially those of you who are going back and you're reading through the X-Men, my recommendation, if you're into this metaphysical big brain bullshit, then go ahead and pick up Longshot, because you probably will like it. You might like the concepts, and I think the overall theme of Mojo and Spiral, and really Ann Nocenti's sort of scathing criticism of Hollywood and that kind of and really the theme right there with Mojo and Mojoverse and the Mojo world and Wild Ways and all that other bullshit is kind of cool. But ultimately, like, for me personally, I just slogged through this and threw this back in my collection and just went back to reading Claremont stuff. Like, you know, to be honest, you could potentially completely disregard the Longshot miniseries. I mean, it wouldn't be proper, but you could just go read Uncanny X-Men Annual number 10, which admittedly isn't one of Claremont's best annuals, just because it was like the first or second usage of the Kitty X-Men scheme that I think Claremont was kind of cribbing from, like, 80s cartoons and stuff. But it was still much more coherent and more entertaining than this stuff. In general, a lot of the New Mutants annuals and the X-Men annuals with Mojo and Spiral are thoroughly entertaining. Not so much this miniseries. So if you insist on having a complete collection, then by all means pick up Longshot. Personally, if you're just in it for the story, you can kind of skip this, and it really doesn't. It really doesn't matter, because most of the things that matter with Longshot are kind of sufficiently explained during the X-Men run in and of itself. Anyhow, guys, that's the video. Let me know what you think. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Hit the bell for notifications. And if you have any comments on X-Men Longshot miniseries, leave it down below, and I will see you next time.